My name's Ryan Harper, and for as long as I can remember, I was the good son, the one who always showed up, the one who kept his head down, and the one who, no matter what, never rocked the boat. I was the one who made sure Thanksgiving dinners ran smoothly, birthdays were celebrated with just the right amount of fanfare, and family vacations were flawlessly planned. I played my part, and it was always a perfect act. But behind the scenes, the cracks were there. I just refused to see them. Growing up in a family like mine, there were expectations. My mother, Karen, was the matriarch. She always knew what was going on, always had a plan, and always managed to make everything look effortless. My dad, Jack, a quiet man, was the steady presence in our lives, always working hard and making sure we had what we needed. And then there was my older brother Ethan, who followed the do-it-by-the-book path just like I did, and Sarah, the shining star, highly successful, always achieving, always the one who seemed to have it all together. We were the family everyone envied. At least, that's what I thought. Every Christmas, every family event, it was like living in a perfectly curated picture, a Hallmark movie, if you will. Everyone played their part, and I couldn't have asked for more. We laughed, we talked about work and school, we told jokes. The surface was always smooth, and I convinced myself that everything beneath it was, too. But like any well-maintained facade, it had cracks, and I was too busy looking at my reflection in the glass to notice them. I always thought I was the one holding the family together. After all, I was the dependable one. I was the one who took care of everyone else, making sure Sarah and Ethan were okay, taking care of Mum when she got overwhelmed, and making sure Dad didn't have to worry about anything. I didn't question it. I just did it because that's what a good son was supposed to do, right? But what I didn't know was that my role in the family wasn't as simple as I thought. I was the glue, sure, but not in the way I imagined. I wasn't the hero. I was the pawn. And it wasn't until Thanksgiving when everything changed that I finally saw it. That night, the perfect act started to crumble. We had just sat down for our usual holiday dinner when Sarah dropped the first bombshell. After 15 years of marriage, she was getting a divorce. No warning. No one knew it was coming. She had been holding up this perfect image of a happy, successful family, but behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. As Sarah explained, her voice tight with emotion, I could see the cracks that had always been there, the ones I had been blind to. My perfect sister was struggling, just like the rest of us. And then came Ethan. He had been distant for years, but it wasn't until then that I learned the truth. He was suffering from severe depression, and had been for years. No one knew. Not Mom, not Dad, not Sarah, and certainly not me. We had all been so focused on keeping up appearances that we missed the signs, and Ethan had quietly been carrying the weight of his own battle. But it was what happened next that broke me. Mom and Dad revealed their own struggles. For the past 10 years, they had been living in denial. Their business was failing. Their finances were in shambles, and they had been using their savings to keep up the appearance of success. I was stunned. How could I not have seen it? How could they have hidden it from me, the one who always tried to hold everything together? That was when I realized that the family I thought I knew wasn't real. We were all playing our parts in a lie. We had been so focused on maintaining a perfect image for the world to see that we never stopped to check if we were okay. The smiles, the laughter, the holidays, none of it was real. It was a well-rehearsed performance, and I was the fool who had been taking it all at face value. As I sat there, digesting the weight of their confessions, I knew something had to change. I wasn't the perfect son, I wasn't the glue, I was just another player in their charade. And as much as I wanted to fix it, to make everything better like I always had, I realized that maybe the only thing I could do now was break free of the cycle. The only way forward was to finally take the mask off and deal with the truth head on. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. After that Thanksgiving, everything started to shift. The perfect family myth that had been built around us began to crumble, but the real weight of it all didn't hit me until later. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the honesty shared around that dinner table would help us heal. We'd been forced to confront the truth about Sarah's divorce, Ethan's depression, and our parents' financial ruin. But what I didn't realize then was that truth had a funny way of shattering the glass even more. The first crack was the feeling that I had been played, not just by my parents, but by the whole system we'd created. They had hidden so much from me, and the worst part was that I had let them. I had been so caught up in keeping everything together, so focused on being the good son, that I had ignored the obvious signs that maybe I wasn't even part of the conversation that mattered. I was just the one who cleaned up the mess, kept the peace, and made sure everything looked neat. I went back home that night with my mind racing. I had always thought I was the one who was in control. Sure, I had my own life, my own troubles, but I was just the dependable one in the background, making sure everything was running smoothly. Now, I realized I had been more of an enabler than a helper. I wasn't taking control of my own life. I was too busy keeping everything together for everyone else that I had no idea how badly things were falling apart around me. The next few days were a blur. I barely slept, kept going over everything in my head, and then I started noticing the little things, the ways I had been sidelined in my own family. It wasn't just about what had been hidden from me. It was about the way I had been treated. The way I had been pushed to the sidelines, always the one to pick up the pieces but never asked for my opinion on what was actually going wrong. I had been the good son for so long that I'd lost myself in the role. That's when I found it. The internal email thread, the one that no one meant for me to see, but somehow ended up in my inbox by mistake. It was titled Redundant Asset Audit, and I, of course, was on it, and not in the way you'd expect. My name was listed next to things like fax machine and guy who hasn't shown up since March 2020. My position wasn't just labeled redundant. It said legacy employee, overpaid, underseen, low risk. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Legacy employee? I was just a number, someone who had been kept around because it was easier to leave me there than to admit the truth. My value had been reduced to a line on a spreadsheet, a remnant of a past that no longer mattered. The sting of it hit harder than I could have anticipated. But then, I made a choice. I wasn't going to react with anger or frustration. That would have been easy. Instead, I started taking screenshots. I captured the email, saved it, and stored it away. This wasn't about a moment of emotional rage. This was about precision. The same way I'd always been the one to patch things up for everyone else, I was going to handle this the same way strategically. I was playing the long game. I wasn't just going to walk away. That would be too easy. I wasn't going to quit in a blaze of glory like some disgruntled employee. I would make them see the full consequences of their actions. I would let them think I was just another faded sticker on the wall, the dumb one, the one they'd underestimated. For the next few weeks, I kept playing my part. I showed up. I made the calls, did the work. I let them think I was just another cog in the machine, a legacy that didn't matter. But beneath that, I started planning, quietly, methodically. It was then that I built a pipeline for one of our largest enterprise clients, let's call them Glass Line. I'd spent months building the relationship, staying in the background, holding the whole thing together when no one else could. The CFO there had my number saved under fixes what your engineers break. But just days before our renewal contract was supposed to be finalized, I logged in to find my access to their repository was gone, vanished. I tried calling, sending messages. Crickets. I wasn't just a redundant asset anymore. I was being shut out. I'd been played again. I reached out to my manager, Rick. He answered on the fourth ring, said he was in back-to-back calls, and hung up without letting me speak. Just like that. I could feel the walls closing in on me. No one cared. No one noticed. But they were going to. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to just accept this as another part of the cycle. It was time to break the chain. It was time to change the rules. And it all started with one simple decision. I was done playing their game. It took me a few days to fully process everything that had happened. The email, the resignation I had seen in my inbox, the silence from my manager, Rick. I could feel the gears in my mind grinding into overdrive, slowly working out my next move. For a long time, I had let myself be invisible in my own life. I was the reliable son, the dependable employee, the one who cleaned up everyone else's messes without ever asking for recognition or credit. But something had snapped after that Thanksgiving dinner, after finding out just how much I had been taken for granted. It wasn't just my parents or siblings anymore. It was my entire existence that was being manipulated. The email I had accidentally received wasn't just about my job, it was about everything. It was a silent reminder of how I had been reduced to a background player in my own story, just like how I had let my family turn me into a tool for their convenience. But what hurt the most wasn't the label of redundant or low risk. No, what hurt was how they thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I was so caught up in the role they had assigned me that I wouldn't question it. And that, in a twisted way, made me angry. It was time for change. I sat down that evening with a pen and paper, determined to make sense of the chaos swirling in my mind. I had been pushed to the edge, but I wasn't going to let it break me. The first thing I needed to do was take control of my own life. I needed to stop playing by their rules. And that meant taking a stand, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been quietly pushed to the margins like I had. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My resignation wasn't going to be a simple goodbye. It wasn't going to be just another day at the office where I quietly packed up my desk and walked out. No, this time it was going to be deliberate. I had spent years building relationships with clients, taking care of problems that no one else wanted to touch, and solving issues behind the scenes. They had all become dependent on me, and yet no one had ever truly seen me. But they would see me now. I opened my email, and in one fluid motion, I drafted my resignation letter. It was professional, calm, but there was something in the tone that was hard to ignore a sharpness. I had no intention of letting them think I was simply leaving to go to another company. This was bigger than that. I wasn't just resigning from a job. I was resigning from a life that had been constructed on lies, manipulation, and neglect. As I wrote, I made sure to CC a select group of clients, those who mattered. Glassline was at the top of the list. I had built their pipeline from the ground up, quietly holding everything together, while my bosses ignored the warning signs. I had been the one they called at 2 a.m. when things went wrong, and I had never once hesitated to help. But now, I wasn't just going to help them. Now, I was giving them the truth. I was telling them why I was leaving, and more importantly, I was giving them an invitation. The subject line was simple: Notice of resignation. The body of the email was direct, outlining my decision to leave the company and the reasons behind it. But the kicker came at the end of my final line, where I mentioned that if they wanted to follow me to my next venture, they were more than welcome to. In essence, I was letting them know that if they wanted to be a part of something real, they had to make the same choice I did, leave the lies behind. I hesitated for just a moment before hitting send. It was the kind of hesitation that always comes before a huge decision, the one where you wonder if you're doing the right thing. But then I thought about everything that had led me to this moment, the years of playing by their rules, the emotional toll it had taken, the missed opportunities, and the unacknowledged work. No, I wasn't hesitating because I was unsure. I hesitated because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. I clicked send. Within minutes, my inbox flooded. Some of the emails were from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months. Others were from clients. But the most interesting responses came from those who had worked with me closely, people who had seen me work behind the scenes, who had appreciated what I brought to the table. Some of them simply replied with, "We follow." Others, more vocal, asked where I was going. It wasn't just about leaving a company anymore. It was about taking back control of my life, of my narrative. And suddenly, I wasn't just the good son anymore. I wasn't just the reliable employee. I was Ryan Harper, a man who had learned the value of self-respect. That night, I didn't feel the usual anxiety about the future. I didn't worry about what might come next. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of empowerment. The future was mine to shape, and for the first time in years, I was taking the reins. The rest of the world would just have to catch up. The morning after I sent that resignation email, I woke up to the kind of silence I hadn't felt in years. The weight of the decision hadn't quite hit me yet, but I could feel the tension in the air. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing what was about to happen but not being able to look away. I had lit the fuse, and now all I could do was watch as the explosion unfolded. I had thought that sending the email would be the hardest part. But no, the hardest part was sitting there, knowing that what I had done was going to change everything, not just for the company, but for my family too. I wasn't just walking away from a job. I was walking away from the role I had played in my family's dynamic. For years, I had been the one who kept everything together. I had been the good son, the responsible one, the one who stepped up when no one else would. But now, I was breaking that chain, and the fallout was inevitable. It didn't take long for the ripple effects to start. By mid-morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Texts, emails, LinkedIn messages, everyone was reacting, but no one quite knew how to react. The clients were the first to respond, and they did so with surprising speed. Glassline, the company I had worked tirelessly for, was the first to reach out. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. The email came through with a simple subject line, "We're moving." It wasn't a question, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a statement. And suddenly, I was at the center of a storm I had only just begun to understand. Glassline wasn't the only one. The emails kept coming in, one after another, each more urgent than the last. My old colleagues, who had barely acknowledged me for months, were now reaching out, asking for details, inquiring about my plans. The loyalty I had earned over the years was paying off, but the real power wasn't in the emails or the offers. It was in the silence that followed. The company had no idea what was coming. By 2:00 p.m., it was clear that things were unraveling. Word had spread to the higher-ups. The senior leadership was in a full-blown panic. My old manager, Rick, finally called me. For the first time in months, Rick actually picked up the phone when I called, and he was desperate. I put him on speakerphone, leaning back in my chair as I listened to him scramble. He was stammering through his words, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the fear behind his voice. "Hey, Todd," he said, his voice overly bright. "I heard about your move. Let's talk, man to man." I could almost hear him trying to re-establish control over the situation, but the words were hollow. He wasn't trying to talk to me as a colleague. He was trying to talk to me like I was a problem he needed to solve. And that's when I made my move. I let the silence stretch, long and uncomfortable, until Rick filled the void with nervous chatter. He tried to downplay it. "You know, I spoke with Glassline. They said some weird stuff about you poaching their business. Can you explain what's going on?" Poaching? No. I had been the one holding their business together when no one else cared, but I wasn't going to argue the point. Instead, I let the silence drag on, just long enough to make him squirm. Finally, I spoke, calm as ever. "Poached? No, Rick. I cultivated. You just forgot to water." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Rick didn't know how to respond. He tried to salvage the conversation, but I wasn't listening anymore. I wasn't going to let him spin the narrative. I wasn't going to let him take credit for the work I had done, the work that had kept the company afloat when it was falling apart at the seams. At that moment, I knew that this wasn't just about leaving a company. This was about exposing the system, about showing just how broken everything really was. As Rick stumbled through his words, I quietly began to formulate my next move. I had already made the decision to leave, but now I was going to make them pay for taking me for granted. I knew where the bodies were buried, every unspoken frustration, every client complaint, every dirty little secret they had hoped I would ignore. I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I wasn't going to let this go. I knew the company was on the brink of collapse, but I wasn't just going to watch it happen from the sidelines. I was going to be the one who lit the match, and I was going to watch it burn. The final move was simple. I sent an anonymous email to the legal department and a few select clients, with a very special attachment backup of a Slack channel I had secretly archived. It was a private group that had been created under the radar, and the discussions in it were far from innocent. Rick, Donna, and a few VPs had been discussing ways to sideline employees, to push out the legacy workers like me. They had even plotted how to slow-roll my access to production until I looked incompetent. The email was my final act of defiance. I wasn't just walking away. I was pulling the curtain back on the whole charade. The next few hours were a blur of chaos. The company was unraveling at the seams, and I was standing at the center of it all. But as I looked at the screen, watching the notifications flood in, I didn't feel guilty. I felt a sense of relief, of freedom. I had finally taken control of my own narrative. The fallout had only just begun, but I was ready. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting. I was making things happen. The aftermath of my resignation had been swift, like the calm before a storm, only for it to break open in a fury. The company I had dedicated years of my life to was in freefall, and I was watching the dominoes topple with a strange sense of satisfaction. The Slack messages had been sent, the emails fired off, and the plan had unfolded exactly as I had hoped. The board was scrambling, the leadership team was fighting to salvage what was left, and my clients, were already pulling their business elsewhere. But there was a part of me that felt something deeper than just victory or relief. The guilt had never really been part of the equation for me. I knew I had done what I needed to do, but watching the wreckage unfold had made me realize something else. This wasn't just about revenge or getting back at the people who had wronged me. It was about taking control of my own life, finally. For years, I had been a cog in someone else's machine, playing the part of the dependable son and the silent employee, always making sure things worked for everyone else. I was done playing that role. As the company's downfall continued, I didn't sit idly by. My phone rang off the hook with messages from my former colleagues, people I had worked with for years, some of whom had never given me a second glance before. Now, suddenly, they were all interested. Suddenly, they were all asking for advice, or wondering where I was going next. But the ones that stuck out were the clients. One by one, they started reaching out. Glassline, the largest client I had worked with for over a year, sent a simple email. "We're moving forward with you. Where are you headed?" That was the first real sign that the shift had begun. It wasn't just about business now. It was about the relationships I had built, the ones that had been ignored by my old company. It wasn't the money, or the new role I was about to take, that made me feel empowered. It was knowing that these people, these clients who had always relied on me, had seen through the facade of corporate nonsense and recognized my worth. I had built those relationships, and they knew it. I called up my mentor from years ago, someone who had always been in the background, never one for office politics. His voice was calm and steady as ever, but I could tell he was just as eager as I was for a fresh start. I let him know that I had already signed on with a new company. 6 figures, full autonomy, a CEO who actually cared about the product and the people behind it. But even more important, I was going to build something entirely new. I didn't just want to escape the wreckage, I wanted to rebuild. And not just for myself, but for those who had been similarly ignored or mistreated, people like Clara from QA, the one who had helped me through the worst of it, who had risked her own job just to pass me vital information. Within days of my resignation, I sent out feelers. If you're tired of working for a company that doesn't appreciate you, I'm starting something new. No more corporate politics, no more empty promises, just real work with real people. It didn't take long for responses to flood in. The people I had spent years working with, the people who understood what it was like to be stuck, to be underappreciated, to be sidelined, started reaching out. I wasn't just building a company, I was building a team, a family of sorts, but not one that relied on keeping secrets or maintaining the perfect image. No, this was a family of people who valued authenticity, hard work, and mutual respect. I realized that my journey was never about revenge or showing my old company what they had lost. It was about breaking free from the cycle, taking the lessons I had learned, and applying them to something that mattered. My new company wasn't going to just be a place to earn a paycheck. It was going to be a place where people actually cared about the work, where loyalty and trust weren't just buzzwords. And if my old company couldn't handle the truth of that, then so be it. The final piece fell into place when Glassline made their exit official, publicly stating that they were moving on to a more agile partner with better development alignment. They tagged my new company in the announcement, and that was it. The writing was on the wall. My old company was finished. But the best part? I was just getting started. It was on a Wednesday afternoon that I sent the last email to my former colleagues, the ones who had reached out to me with apologies or just casual questions about where I was going. I thanked them for their support and let them know that I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces this time. It was their turn. I watched from the sidelines as the company's stock plummeted, as their leadership team started scrambling for cover. I wasn't concerned anymore. I had a new life, a new path, and a new team to build. As for my family, I wasn't going to carry the weight anymore. My parents had to face the reality of their financial struggles. My siblings had to confront the issues that had been buried for too long, But for the first time, I was no longer the one holding everything together. I had let go. And in letting go, I had finally found the freedom I had been searching for.